Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're going to Masechta Sukkah, Daf Beis. We are going to start at the beginning of the Masechta. Sukkah she gavol l'mal me'asher ma'ama. So we have a sukkah which the schach is above 20 amos from the ground, psula, and the Gemara is going to discuss why it uses that language of psula. Yehuda machshir. So we have a machlokas whether or not a sukkah can be above 20 amos. So she'ena gavol asar tfachim. However, everyone agrees when it comes to these other three details, namely, the sukkah cannot be below 10 tfachim, which is a handbreadth, approximately 3 to 4 inches. It has to have 3 walls, and if it has more sun than shade, we'll discuss exactly on the top or the bottom, then again it uses the language of psula. So it's not hasam. We learned over there in the beginning of Masechtas Eruvin, not too long ago, Mavoi shu gavoa me'esrim ama. So mavoi, in which Rashi explains what a mavoi is. Shehu sasu mishol stadin. It's closed on 3 sides. Verosha pasuach rishus harabim. And then the 4th side is open to the public thoroughfare. V'chatzeros pasucha islo v'yoytzai sovois rishus harabim. And you have courtyards that are open to it, and those go to the rishus harabim. So the people who are in the Chatzer, it's like Rishus Yachid. However, the only way they're allowed to carry from one house to the other, which has a linking Chatzer, you need to have Eruv Chatzeros, or when it comes to carrying in the Mavoi itself, you need a Shitu Mavois. Shachatzeros Ko Achas Rishus Atzmo, because each Chatzer is really separate, because even though they have a single mavoi which it's connected to, however, because they have homes connected only to specific Chatzeros, in certain ways they are separated. And therefore Rashi says you need to do a shituf with pas or with yayin, with bread or wine, a shituf achas min Chatzeros. In order to be able to do a shitufei mavos, to be able to carry in a mavoi, you have to put wine or bread in one of those chatzeros. Since it doesn't have a 4th wall, the carvely use dairushes arabim, and as you're walking in that mavoi, as we talked about at great length in the Masechtas Eruvin, but Rashi feels compelled to go through all this again. So because of that, hetzrichu heker b'roishai. You have to have some type of recognizable indicator, so that a person is not going to just simply start carrying in the mavoi and then all of a sudden start bringing it to the Rishus Harabim. So what should you use? Rashi says lechi zoku for kaisel. You either use some type of horizontal beam or a pole, or that which is vertical. And the question is, if the walls are above 20 amos and you end up having this horizontal beam, so that also is not going to be acceptable. That beam has to be lower. So that is not such a brief introduction to this Gemara. So again, we learned in the Masechtas Eruvin that Mavishu Gavoa Meser Ma'alma Yimayit. Now it's interesting language. Even though Rabbi Yehuda Omer no Sarach, we still see that the machlokas just like in our Mishnah, but for some reason we choose a different language. Instead of saying like our Mishnah Apostle, it tells us what we're supposed to do. It tells us to lower it. So the Gemara asks the question. So Mashna Gabi Sukkah the Tani Psula, Mashna Gabi Mavoi the Tani Tekanta. How come when it comes to Sukkah it tells us just blank statements, apostle? However, when it comes to Eruvin, it actually tells you the remedy of what you should do. So Gemara gives 2 answers. First of all, Sukkah deraisa Tani Psula, Mav Rabbanan Tani Tekanta. Since Sukkah is deraisa, says Rashi, the Esrim Alma delay Alpi the Midaraisa, we're going to see we're actually going up on a pasuk. So the Kaidim Shenishtis Mishnah Nemr Shirah Messina. Even before we saw this Mishnah, we already knew its measurements. And therefore it says the language apostle, which Rashi says Koloimer Lu Nasis Ketira Ukahalacha. You didn't do like you should have known, which is according to the Torah that it's apostle. However, when it comes to a Mavoi, which is completely the Rabban, as we said in the Midaraisa, the fact that there's 3 walls, you shouldn't really need a kaira at all. It's just, again, it's a mishum heker, so it's a din d'rabbanan. Therefore, we don't see the words pasul because it's not pasul. As Rashi says, man pasul kodim shenishas l'shazu. Who pasuled it? right? So therefore, since this is the first time this was ever mentioned, that's the reason why it says Tani Takata. So that's how Rashi explains this. If you look at Taisus, this is Dihavi Tani Yamayit. If the Mishnah over here said Yamayit, Chayshin and Dilma Toy'ina Shlomer Yamayit L'Chatchila. Maybe it just means, okay, above 20 amos, you're supposed to do it L'Chatchila, but you haven't Kshera. However, if you kept it that way, it's still Sukkah kosher. The Doctor Gloshaina Dilma Asili the Sur Deraisa. And that's the reason the whole issue is, since it's in Deraisa, we don't want to take any chances that you make that distinction and make them think that, oh yeah, it's just, you're supposed to do it. If you don't do it, it's nishkafel. So we say a very strong language is possible. So the person should know that you're not going to make that mistake. So again, I entice. That's answer number one. Really, when it comes to din deraisa, we also should say the remedy, what we're supposed to do. And therefore the question is, how come by our Mishnah we don't say lower it? Miu Sukkah, the Nafesh Milsa, or Mile, because there's so many words, there's so many different cases in our Mishnah. So Pasuk B'Tanib Sul, it just tells us very clearly what you're, not what you're supposed to do, but just as possible. And you'll figure out what the din is, what the halach is. However, Mavoi do Nafesh Mile Ten Dekata. When it comes to Mavoi, it's only one thing. It's not all these different cases will have to tell us, oh yeah, you have to add more schach, you have to raise the sukkah, you have to lower the sukkah, you have to add an extra wall. So instead of mentioning all these details, it just simply says that it is possible. So correct the Gemara, how in fact do we know that this is the din regarding a sukkah, that it can't be above 20 amos, at least a fee the sheet of the Tanakh. So we have three terutzim. Omer Rab, you ever quote the pasuk says, so it says that in order that we should know that Bnei Yisrael were sitting in a sukkah, so it has to be something that is a heker. So therefore we say like this: until 20 amos, you are able to see the schach. Your eyes don't see. So if you're just sitting in a normal circumstance and you're going to be looking, you're not going to be looking so far up. And therefore, for that reason, we say that it has to be below, because otherwise you're not going to have the kavanah of recognition that you're sitting in the sukkah. That's the first of the three answers. The sukkah tail until Yomi Mechayim. It says in Sefer Yeshaya that the sukkah should be shade for you from the heat. So Ades from Alma Adam Yoshim is still sukkah. Mal Mesrim Alma and Adam Yoshim is still sukkah. El B'tzil the families. If the schach is so high up, you're not sitting in the shade of the sukkah anymore, but rather you're sitting in the shade of the walls. And we have this Perish Chai booklet, and you can see over here in this picture over here that if the schach is so high up, you're not able to see, rather sit in the shade of the schach. So I'm going to buy so in second. Elmiato, he says, what if you make a sukkah in Arshas Kanaim Hachanam Habi Sukkah? It's like over here. If you have a sukkah which is in between two very tall mountains, and which because of that you are still not getting any shade, even though that sukkah is less than 20 amos. So again, you're not getting shade from the schach, you're getting shade from the mountains which are on both sides. So Amalei says no, you can't make that distinction. You can't say that. There's Hassam over there. If you remove those mountains, you'll still have the shade. However, if you remove the walls, as you can see in this picture, there will not be the shade of the sukkah, because the shade will end up going on the side, and you will end up being in the sun. And therefore the schach is not providing for you that protection. So that's the second parrot. Third answer. The sukkah's teishu shiva sham. You're supposed to sit in the sukkah for 7 days. So you have to leave your permanent home, which is your physical house, which is a roof, strong walls, and you're supposed to go into a diras arai for a short amount of time. And therefore the sukkah should be a diras arai. And practically, until 20 amos, your sukkah typically is going to be a temporary dwelling. However, if it is it becomes permanent, because how are you able to have the schach and the sukkah, which is more than 20 amos. Again, an amo between an elbow to the middle finger is 18 inches, so let's say it's more than 30 feet high. So obviously it's got to be very strong walls. So 1 second. If you're telling me it's all depending on what's strong, what if the walls are made out of metal? Or let's say a person uses just any walls which are very, very strong, so that's diras keva, but we know it's still a sukkah. It's not totally on how strong the walls should be. This is what I meant to say. Ad esrim until 20 amos, typically that's how it's done. So ki diras keva, nami nothing. If you ended up making it permanent, it's still fine. Nami nothing. You're yaitzi, you fulfill the obligation. However, typically it's something which, in order to make something so high, it's a diras keva. Even kiyavad nami diras arai namalo nothing. Even if it was a diras arai, technically you say, oh, it shouldn't be a problem. You still have not fulfilled your obligation. As we continue to base on the base. Now, why do we have these three different opinions? Why can't they just simply agree to one another and just stick to one opinion? So where is it like this? Kul karabo le'amri kahu yadil with darasi. The first of the amoira, not everyone agrees to him. For the pasuk v'man yedu, why? Because that pasuk is not talking about, says Rashi, lav be a deity yeshiva sukkah kama. It's not talking about remembering that now that you're sitting a sukkah. There'll be a dias dairos. Haboyin hekiv sukkahs anani kavod hanasu lavois. That's talking about that you should remind ourselves that they used to sit in sukkahs, which was zecher the anani hakavod, the clouds of glory, which we're going to see later on. That's actually machlokas. This is sukkahs mamash anani hakavod. But regardless, that this opinion is saying has nothing to do with you have to look at the schach. Again, it's a zecher just means that you should remember that there was a nani hakavod. That plus in Yeshaya is not for talk about now, but it's talking about in futuristic times, which is talking about in times of Mashiach. Arab Zera in Kalim Mikrava Chuba Teilatel Yomam. Mine was Sukkah Teilatel Yomam. Shema Minatarti. The fact that it used the word Sukkah, not Chuba, so it's clear it's talking about two things. Says Rashi, what are the two things? The Ein Shem Sukkah El Hasoy Letzel. A sukkah is only if it was made for shade, and he the most of Mashiach Mishum the Asul Letzel Kriya Sukkah. That which has shade is called a sukkah. So we don't hold like him either. And Karavanamu Amri Mishum Kushid Abaya. It's a very strong question that Abaya asked. Is how the mechitza shel barzel? Well, chayra, that's a diras, seems like a diras keva, but it's less than 20 amos. What's wrong with that? There is nothing wrong with it. So therefore, no one held like him either. So therefore, each of the opinions stuck to their own thoughts. Now, Kamana Zahadi Yomirav Yeshaya Marav. Who of those three Amarayim fit mostly like this following statement? Machlokas, the whole machlokas between the Tanakama of our Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda is B'shedavos because the schach. That's only if the schach and the walls are not touching. Although the fanas megias the schach, if the walls go straight up until the schach, even if it's above 20 amos, doesn't matter. So long as the walls and you have the schach immediately touching the walls, then it's kosher. Even if it's mal me'asim even if the sheet is tanakam. So come on, karaba. So the whole issue is because you're not going to see it. But typically, when you see a wall, you look all the way up until the wall ends. And once the wall ends, you're going to notice the schach. Of course, if you look up and that's it, the wall, there's just air, for some reason, at that point you're going to stop looking, I guess, and therefore you're not going to see the schach. So therefore, this is telling us an interesting distinction, that the only time the shita of Rabba would apply, that there's a machlokas, is dafka when the walls do not reach the schach. However, the walls reach the schach, there is not an issue because you'll see. So who's this statement like? There's a three-way machlokas, how big, as far as the length and width is concerned. So the most stringent opinion is it has to be 4 by 4 amos. Otherwise, it's not a kosher sukkah. Now, if the whole machlokas is if it's not that, or it's only that. Let's say you have a nice sized big sukkah, Now, feel Ma'am Yasser Ma'am Kshir. Come on, because there, the Yomi Mishum Sale, who became under Rabcha, he can sell Sukkah. So, what was his issue? If it's above 20 amos, so you're going to be sitting in the shade of the walls. But in this situation, even if it's very high, since you have a very wide Sukkah, so you'll still be able to potentially sit in the shade of the Succah. And therefore, the only time the Tanakhama says no above 20 amos is if it's a small Sukkah. However, it's a very big Sukkah, which is more than 4 by 4 amos, it doesn't make any difference even if it's above 20 amos. Kaman Azla Hadim Rachan Baraboy Marav. Who's this statement like? Machloikas b'shin machzekas el kadei rosh habru v'shulchana. Avol machzekas rosh kadei rosh habru v'shulchana afil ma'am yasam ma'avakshera. So come on, who's this like? That there's another opinion. We'll see the machloikas b'sham beis Hillel. So over here it mentions you have to be able to put rosh over rubo, your head, the majority of your body, because when a person used to be sitting, like we say on Pesach, kulonu musubin, they used to eat not sitting like we do, but lying down. And therefore, when they would sit in the sukkah, we measure that your head is in the sukkah, the majority of your body, and also the shulchan, the table, also needs to be there. If the table is not there, maybe we're concerned, you may end up being drawn after your table, and you may end up not eating in the sukkah itself. And therefore you have to have at least rosh shulchan, which is measured at 7 by 7 tefachim, not very big. So even if it's more than 7 by 7 tefachim, it says it's kosher even if it's above 20 hours. So who's that like? The Kachad. It's not like anyone. Why? Why can't it be like the sheet that rubs there? Because if it's 8 by 8 tefachim, it's still a small sukkah. It's a very small sukkah. So it's above 20 amos, that's still not going to have you sitting underneath the shade of the Succah. You'll still be sitting in the shade of the walls, and therefore it can't be like anyone. Now, Bishlam, Rabbi Yeshaya, I can understand when we're going through these different statements. Rabbi Yeshaya, Pligin, Rav Huna, Rav Chanan, Barabu. The Inhu, Koyavi, Shira, B'mashcha. He mentions the measurement of this length and width. The Yulo, Koyavi, Shira, B'mashcha. But he talks about something entirely different, right? The whole question is if it's Megis l'Schach, if the walls reach the Schach. However, Ella, Rav Huna, Rav Chanan, Baraba, Neba Behekshir Sukkah Mithli. The fact that they say that the only time the Tanakhama and Rabbanan argue is either if it's Rosh Hashanah or 4 by 4 almos. So Il must be that that's exactly what they're arguing about. They're arguing how big a sukkah must be. The Mar Savar Hekshir Sukkah Ba'arba Amos, which is the second statement we saw. The Mar Savar Hekshir Sukkah the Machzekas Rosh Hashanah. Right? Clearly that must be what they're arguing about. So on this, that must be what they're arguing about. So the Gemara says, well, the Kul Yalma Hekshir Sukkah Rosh Hashanah. Everyone holds a sukkah only needs to be 7 by 7 tefachim. So why does the second statement mention Arba al Arba, 4 by 4? The Hachaba Kamifki. This is where they argue. So again, if it's a normal sized sukkah in height, so as long as it's 7 by 7 tefachim, Rosh Hashanah, it's a kosher sukkah. So what are they arguing about? The Marsavar b'machzekas Rosh Hashanah pligi. The Rabbanan and the Rabbi Yehuda only argue when it comes to exactly 7 by 7. No. The even the Tanakhama will still say that it's possible above 20 almas anywhere between Rosh Hashanah and 4 almas. So again, Me'ikar Adin, all you need to do is have a sukkah which is Rosh Hashanah. The question is, what happens in the event that it is above 20 almas? And that's where the question lies. Question 7. Maha nafkamina. What's the difference between Mandiyam and the Alpina and Sukkah, Postel the Sukkah, Givoyim and Esther Mama, since it says Laman Yidur Seichem, and the Mandiyam says that we went out from Sukkah Tiel at sale. So there's two answers. Either the Machlokas is by the Funus Megias L'Schach, Laman Yedu Ika, but sale Leka. So again, according to that first shot, if the walls go all the way to the schach, then it's a kosher sukkah, even above 20 amos. Second is Rachva Medalad Amos Sale Ika Laman Yedu Leika. If it's more than Dalad Amos wide, so then that's the machlokas there as well. Okay. Meisvei Prekta Gemara. Sukkah Shigabol Amam Esem Ram Psula. Yehuda Mashar Ad Arbaim B'Chamishim Al. So this question is like Guzma, Gemara and Erevin discusses this even 40 and 50 hours. So Amar Yehuda, Masa behalani Malka, the story of Halani the queen, the Lud from this place, Shahaisa Sukkah Gabo Mesramam. Her sukkah was above 20 hours. So you had a bunch of elders, the Chachamim went back and forth there, and they said nothing. So Amar Mishum Raya, Yishahaisa put them in a sukkah. Well, what does that have anything to do with? That's not a raya that we hold a sukkah can be above 20 hours. She's a woman, and women do not have to sit in a sukkah. So Amalahan Valoy Shiva Banim Havilah. Bashil had 7 sons. So she had sons, so aren't children, aren't boys, men, obligated in the sukkah? Vote. All of her actions were only done in accordance to the dinim of the chacham. So why do we have to add that second point? Okay, fine, she had 7 boys, but maybe they were still all katanim. The katanim determined a sukkah. A katan who was under the age of bar mitzvah is put from sukkah. Now kivan de shiva havi, but she had 7. So he actually the havi b'huchad shenu sarach imo, unless maybe you can say she had triplets and quadruplets. But assuming that she had all her children one after the other, so these children have reached the age of what's called shen sarach imo. More is going to talk exactly how we know when that stage is. But the point is that they at least have some obligation, albeit midurabana. So if the chitam, okay, cut shen sarach imo midurabana hu the b'chaya. Only these kids are obligated midurabana to sit in the sukkah. Maybe the ihi midurabana lo mishkach. Well, maybe she's not careful that she doesn't adhere to dini durabana. No, tashma but kamasel also over the chum. That's why we said in the second statement that she was very careful to adhere to dini durabana. And you can ask. So let's say she wasn't, but the fact that the Zakanim were there, they would have still spoken up, right, and said, this is the din midurabana. But the point is that they didn't say anything, and they knew that she was very makbid. So it must be that there was nothing wrong with sitting in such a sukkah above 20 amos. So it's a question according to the Tanakama. Now, Bishul Mamandir, remember Shendabanas Megis L'Schach, Machlaikis, Darkashel Machlai Shiva Sukkah Shendabanas Megis L'Schach, as we continue to Gimel Mid Aleph, Yishum Avira. So you can say that the Tanakama don't even have an issue with this. Why? Because it was a sukkah in which the question makes sense. The one who says that the whole machlokas, the Tanakama Rabbanan, is only when the walls did not reach the schach. The walls did not reach the schach in this case because someone of her status would like to have nice air quality, and therefore they wanted these gaps between the wall and the schach. And therefore the question makes sense according to that, because this in fact would be a riot to Rabbi Yehuda that even though it's not Megis L'Schach, we paskin we hold like him, right? If the whole machlokas is only by sukkah katana, but if it's a bigger sukkah, then it's not an issue even above 20 amos. So what's the whole question? She's not going to sit in a tiny little sukkah. She's not going to sit in a tiny little sukkah, so it's a big sukkah. So who cares above 20 amos? Everyone holds, even the Rabbanan, that it's okay. So it's not a question. It's talking about a situation where she sat in a sukkah which is kitanius, which have like little booths. As this picture over here demonstrates, that there's like a bunch of little sukkahs, and each of them are small, and they all sat in these different ones. Gemara, for some reason, thought that was a good answer. Gemara says, "V'chi darkish shel malka leisha b'sukkah asui kitanius." When she sit in such small sukkahs, so Rav Ashi l'nitzroch el kitanius shebo. It's referring to a small one in it. So if you look at this picture, there was a large sukkah, and then a small one which is directly connected to it, like on the inside, as this Perish Chai picture shows us. So what's the whole machlokas? Rabbanan Savri Banal B'Sukkah Mal Yahaviyas. The Rabbanan say, no. They were sitting in this huge big sukkah, and therefore that's why it was allowed. Right? V'ihi Yasu B'Kitanius Mishum Sinusa. She sat in that smaller room, which was really a sukkah puzzle, but the Rabban don't care because she's not mechuyev b'davar. And why does she sit in such a small thing? Because of sneas, because of privacy and modesty. That's why the Zakanim said nothing, because The boys were sitting in a kosher sukkah, and the Chiloni Malka was sitting in a pasul sukkah, but it doesn't matter, she's part of the sukkah anyway. The children were together with her, and even so, they said nothing. So if you look at this very important taisus on the top, we're going to stop here. Masha Dochak B'Kuntris L'Rav Chanan Barabba Ma Raya Rabbi Yehuda Ha'i Efshir L'Shiva Banim B'Shiva Tvachim. How could 7 children sit in a sukkah which is 7 Tvachim? Ma Pirchi the Dilma Arucha Tuva of L'Ohaisa Rachma Shiva Tvachim V'Neva Oisa Oirach Haviyasvi. So according to Taisus, when it says 7 by 7, it doesn't have to be mamish 7 by 7. He holds that even as long as it is 7 times 7 is 49. So that would a square tvachim, if you will. So let's say, well, marshal, you would have 3 tvachim, and then 16 by 0.5, right? For example, so 16 times 3, or 16.5 times 3 is 49.5, which is more than 7 times 7, 49. So according to Taisus, l'chayra, it doesn't have to be square, which is an interesting shot. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's see a couple of questions, a few questions. Starting off with my tests from Rabbi Gibber back in the 90s. Sukkah Shigibol, this is actually Rabbi Schlonger, rather, from Baltimore. Sukkah Shigibol Me'asimama, Psul, Mavoy, it says Yamayit. So, Madua Kasab Sukkah Loshen Psul. This is what I wrote. Since Sukkah is midiraisa from the Torah, and we learn it is a halacha Moshe Sinai, therefore we learned the halacha before. But Mavoy is Rabbanan, and we didn't know about this halacha, what to do, until we saw it over in our Mishnah, says Rashi. Or since by Sukkah there are 4 different cases, which each fixing is different, we would have too many words in our Mishnah. Instead, we combine it with Pasuk. Mavoy only has 1 case, and therefore we could tell you what to do. Question 2. The question is, what would the Ma Kushios Abaya al Rav Zera? If you have a sukkah between 2 mountains, there are also you were saying it wouldn't be a good sukkah since you're getting shade on the mountain and not from the schach. Madu Rav Zera Rabbi Loi Amru, like the other shitas. His psul, his pasuk he brought down was talking about past generations of how the clouds of glory protected the Bnei Israel, but not about the type of sukkah. Machlokes Rabban Rabbi Yehuda the Mishnah. First one says if the walls aren't touching the schach, but if they are even more than 20 ounces kosher. If the sukkah is only dal by dal, if it's more than that, it's kosher. If the sukkah is only 7 by 7 tefachim, if more than that, it's kosher. Mi Masha Gemara Mamasa Shalhilani Amalka. You got that question wrong, but the question is, so his work, the Kitzer as a kushya. The question is on the Rabbanan that L'chayra, the fact that they didn't say anything shows that the sheet is like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbanan held that the children were in the big sukkah, which is kosher, and she sat in the puzzle one because of privacy. It is not possible to have 8 people in such a small sukkah, which Rabbi Yehuda holds. Okay, that's it. TA 12. Be'ez shir shel sukkah nechlu b'masnisin ipsul u'malum esrim alma, etc. 3 answers. Chad ma'ademer b'machzekas kiddush b'shulchanai, chad ma'ademer arba amos, chad ma'ademer af yoysim adalat amos l'taim and rabba v'rah. Okay. Be'ez oiv v'nechlu be'esham be'eshil be'inyan rosh b'shulchano. Okay, that's going to be tomorrow's talk. TB 13. Sukkah shil ma'am esrim alma. Rabba Yoel Flipsua Minixim Mani Durasechem. Rav Zeriel Sukkah Til Etzel. Ma nafkamina between these 2 opinions. Okay? So we said this already with question 7. According to Rabba, it's Talit Tifanos Megis L'Schach. According to Rav Zera, if it's more than Dalad al Dalad, Adkan.